We have a very special episode planned today. After an enormous amount of arm twisting, Bob, my esteemed co-host, has agreed to be our guest. Bob Cireddu is the founder and leader of Edutech Group, a K-12 operational IT company. Bob joins us from Ohio, but supports over 75 instructional buildings with IT operation services across the country. Bob is also a race car driver, a collector of watches, and a friend. A few weeks ago, we did an episode where Bob interviewed me, and after Bob's spectacular performance in that episode, there was an outcry of demand from our listeners to do an episode with Bob as our guest. Welcome, Bob Cireddu.
Thank you, Alex. I assume that my daughter emailed you and said, you need to interview my dad. That's the outcry that you got from our audience, correct?
Maybe.
yeah, maybe. Right. Dear Alex, have my dad on more.
Or maybe it's great. Like, I know this is not a place where you are comfortable, but I really appreciate you doing this episode because, you know, you and I have known each other for a few years now. And so this summer it'll be 3 years already.
That's right.
I have really enjoyed getting to know you, and I think you've got a great story to share. So I also know, as you regularly tell our listeners, you're a little more introverted.
A little. Everybody's more introverted than you, Alex.
Well, nonetheless, I really appreciate you being willing to sit in the guest chair today. This is going to be fun.
So you and I have presented together on occasion on cybersecurity and the role of technology in education. And as I tell everybody, and I will tell our audience today, Alex is a communications major. Bob was an engineering major. Please grade on a curve appropriate to our training.
All right. So you actually threw me a bone right there. That's where I want to kind of start. Is regularly you talk about how you're the engineer, but you've been in education now for quite a few years. So tell us a little bit about your engineering background and how did you get into educational technology?
I studied chemical engineering, actually, which of course leads naturally to working in educational technology, right? So there's not much to tell. My first engineering job was as an interposing logic systems engineer, a systems engineer at a company that designed control systems for power plants. They called them distributed control systems, but they were really computer control systems for power plants. So I learned about computers and networks doing that job. And I learned a great deal about that sort of work. I think I took 2 classes in college that pertain to computers actually in my studies, Visual Basic and maybe something in COBOL. I don't know. Bad, old stuff. At the same time, though, I'd had an interest, follow along if you can. I had an interest in race cars. I grew up in a family that drives race cars. You said I'm a race car driver. My dad raced, my brother races, and I still race cars. But so I had this bit of dream that I wanted to be a professional race car driver too. And I got an opportunity with a professional race car team here in Ohio. Larry Nance, senior, a former NBA player, had owned the team, and I went to work for him. After a couple of times of being successful with that, I was hired as a full-time engineer for a race team based in Detroit. And I moved to Detroit. It was everything I thought.
What does the race car engineer do?
So that's a good question, right? That's so everything from weather, aerodynamics, car performance can be in tune-up in an engine or performance adders it can be set to weather. I did a lot of work in aerodynamics, gear ratios for optimizing tire size, transmission gear ratios, rear end gear ratios, that sort of thing. Sort of brought a technical look at stuff that had been typically at that point in the early 90s. Crew chiefs had learned by being at the track. So I took my engineering background in physics, chemistry, mathematics, and applied it to that. And we had some success. So that's what an engineer for a race team did then. I haven't been an engineer for a race team for most of this millennium, so it's been a while. So I took a job with a team in Detroit. It
Yeah.
was, flew on private jets to races, worked there, but it kind of when it takes something you want to do and like to do and it turns into something you have to do, where winning is now part of your pay and part of
Uh,
it kind of it wore on me. I worked for a few different teams, and so I parted ways with the last team, but stayed on as their the internet was getting big in the late 90s, and I took on a role as an IT administrator for this group of auto dealerships that the owner of the race team had. And so I did that for a few years, but I started to get homesick and wanted to move back to the Cleveland area where I grew up, and found a position as a director of technology at Riverside Local Schools.
Gave up
And
private jets to work in the local public school system.
no, no, no. Private jets to races. Drove my little car to work in the public school system. I did. That is so it's funny you say that when the assistant superintendent called me to offer me the job, he had seen my resume and it included that, work as a race team engineer for a number of teams. And he's like,
Yeah.
Bob, will you work for what we can pay you?
Right?
Um, so I did, and I answered yes, and yeah, that's how I ended up at Riverside Schools as the director of technology, and that was it'll be 20 years ago in August.
Okay. Chemical engineering to race car engineer to network admin. Um, with only 2 computer science courses in college, you must be pretty self-taught in all of this.
It turns out that I'm a self-taught kind of learner. I was not much of a student in school, as you're well aware of. It turns out I was the kind of guy who, if given a chance to play with it, I could figure it out and learn it, which I did. And that's yeah, I'm a self-taught business person. I'm a self-taught network engineer. I'm a self-taught self-taught.
There's a whole episode right in that question of somebody who was maybe not very successful in school, but very successful in life by being self-taught. There's a question about how we have structured our education system when that is when that can be a common reality. So you were homesick and decided you want to stay, and so, but how? Let me just why the schools? Why with a network admin, and when was this roughly that you started in the school district?
So I moved from Detroit in 2004. So technology, as you and I are roughly the same age, even though I look much younger.
But you are, for the record, a little bit older.
I am older. It's a
just making sure all the
darn fact
listeners are aware of that. Okay, go ahead, Bob. Sorry,
Yes.
you're
Yes.
older.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
no, no.
I interrupted you where you were as you were saying you were older. Go ahead.
Oh, that's oh, Alex, the things you do to me. A poll at the end. Who looks younger? That's what we'll do. So 2004, I moved back, and actually I wish I could say that I was a visionary that you are and said, hey, educational technology, that's the future right there. And but it wasn't. It was a matter of, it was an opportunity to move into Riverside at the time was about 5,000 students. It had about 700 computers. So it was an opportunity to broaden my horizons. I had been working for a large auto group in Detroit that had maybe 150 to 250 end users on
Okay,
computers. So it
that's a
was an
big
opportunity
jump.
for me to be bigger, gain a little more experience.
Okay, that makes sense. And actually, that's one thing we chatted a little bit about on a previous episode, is how you know the size and scale and complexity of educational networks is actually pretty profound.
It
So it
is.
really is a great place to kind of learn and grow, because it's a tough space. So Bob, were you the tech director or a network admin? What was your role there?
So I was a tech director, and it was just myself and another person
Yep.
to do that. But at the time, there was no Wi-Fi. The phones weren't on the network, no cameras, no access control on the network, no bring your own devices, no students with devices. Half of those 700 computers weren't even on the network. They were
Wow.
just Macs in elementary that were, you put a disk in to do whatever activity the students might be
Mm-hmm.
doing. So there were 2 servers, 2 physical servers, one in the high school and one in the middle school. So it was a much a much different environment than our modern, schools. Even the smallest schools today will have, multiple servers, uh, many networks within their wired and wireless networks. Uh, they'll have everything from access control to security systems and student devices all on that same network. So it's obviously much more robust now. Are you dealing with too many broken Chromebooks at your school? It can be tough to keep up. That's where the STS Education and FedEx Fixed Cost Chromebook Repair Program comes in. For $99, we take care of everything: shipping, parts, and labor. This means fewer headaches for you and more consistent learning for your students. To learn more, check out stsed.com/break-fix.
Sure. And is that where you were when you started to grow your team and start to take on other districts, or did you move to another place before that?
So it was at Riverside. I had been there for about 10 years and we'd got things the way we'd kind of gotten through that initial we're into technology. I think we had started with wireless deployments at that time. Chromebooks were a thing, although Riverside had not yet moved to a one-to-one model. So still not exactly what we see in a modern school, but
Yeah.
certainly getting there. And there was a small school district adjacent to ours. When I say small, about 500 students that had got a bequeathment. They were left money for Chromebooks for their teachers by a famous author. They had these Chromebooks, and they did not have a tech director at the time. So they had contacted our school and asked if I could come over, or somebody could come over and take a look, and and help them out. So I, gladly did. Went over there. We went and here's 400 Chromebooks in a room, and we got one out of the box, and I turned it on and I said, okay, well, let's go somewhere. I looked around, as network engineers are prone to do. I look at the ceiling to see if I see an access point or what kind of
Right.
access point they have. And I go, we have to go somewhere where we have Wi-Fi. And they're like, we don't have Wi-Fi. Okay, I know what your problem is. So
Right.
I'd recommended them to them that they were going to need somebody to manage their technology there. And they agreed. They had posted a job and they were looking to hire. So I offered to help them interview for the position. They could interview them to see if they're the right person for their team. They'd fit in, character, makeup. And then I just asked some technical questions to make sure that they were getting what they needed. And we interviewed 6 people that day, and none of them got to the technical point. Like I never didn't ask any technical questions. They just weren't the right people to work in a school environment. So we
Well, hang on, because I do want to get back to you kind of helping them find somebody, right? And I know a little bit about where this story goes. Ooh, foreshadowing. But what do you mean? You interviewed several people for a tech director position. You didn't even get to the technical questions and decided that they weren't the right fit. What does that mean?
So I didn't decide that they weren't the right fit. That was made by the superintendent and I think the
Okay.
special education director. It
But
came
what
down
were
to
they looking for? What is a right fit? I think a good number of our listeners are people who are in ed tech, and I think they have a sense of that. But we also, have a lot of people who are like, well, like your daughter, and then my mom occasionally, who don't understand what it means necessarily to be uh, an ed tech leader, and particularly from the soft skills side of things. And quite frankly, I know a lot of people who hire tech directors who don't know what it means from the soft skills kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about that. What were they looking for?
I couldn't go back 10 years and say what they were looking for, but I feel like having worked with
Mm.
them a bit, I knew what they were looking for. They want somebody who fits in as part of their team. You and I have probably come across that tech person who wants to prove to you that they're smarter than you, which is big taboo in our organization. That's not the goal. They know you're smarter than them when it comes to technology. That's why they called you to come fix it.
Right.
Please fix it and have a nice day. So some of it is, one of the other problems we face even today, and I see into the future is people's requirements for compensation were far outweighed a
Yeah.
capability of a school to pay.
Yeah.
So they had those sort of discussions, and they came up short. Somebody might have some technical skills, but they wanted to be left alone in the office and not have to interface with a board or
Yeah.
teachers. And then you might have somebody who's great at all of that, but they wanted 2 or 3 times what the school could pay.
Yeah.
then there's also no path forward. Once you're a tech director at a school, there's nowhere up. If you're a tech director or CTO or CIO, that's rarely hired into in the size of schools that we work with in the, you know, 5,000 or smaller schools and school districts.
Yeah.
There's nowhere up from there. You're not going to become head of school. You're not going to become a superintendent from that position. So you could be maxed out in your career path, fairly early.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why schools and districts really struggle to find tech staff. Like what you just said is a pretty tall order before you even get into the skill set. So I pulled you off your story. I want to bring you back to where you were. You were saying you were older than I am. Oh no, wait, sorry, no, I'm sorry. You were saying,
Well played,
you were
Alex.
saying
Well played.
several people.
I'm noticing a theme.
You were saying that several people were eliminated before you even got to the technical questions.
Not several, all of them. They were. So we struck an agreement to where myself and actually at Riverside, we were at a point where we might have needed to add one more person to our team. But budgets are budgets, and adding another person in technology wasn't just like today, wasn't going to be easy. So we struck an agreement with them. They would pay Riverside schools a flat amount for us to provide technology support. And I didn't know anything about how to do it. So I just said, you're going to be our school just like Riverside is. We're going to treat you as if you're our school. We're not going to count hours. If you need it, we're going to do it. And we hired at that time, actually, Ashley Medwig, who's still our programs manager at Edutech. We hired her. She had just finished her degree in fine art. You'll notice a theme of self-learners when it comes to technology in our organization. But Ashley started just as a technician. She had worked with us in summers previous to that when she was in college and in high school. And she came on, and myself and the assistant tech director, we provided that support. It worked out well. That small school district about 2 years later had been tagged to be consolidated with a larger school district that it was near, not the school district that I worked for.
Yeah.
So we just thought we were done with this shared services model. We would hand over the reins to the technology to that tech department and step aside. As we were working with the tech director for that new school that was being merged into, the superintendent recognized that we were, I guess, a bit more professional. This is what he had told me: more professional, we had more documentation, more understanding of what was needed for education. Their tech person had been hired out of the healthcare environment, and so they came to, if I recall, a mutual agreement, and he left and asked us to provide those services. So this was a much bigger school than the little one we had been working with. So we went to our superintendent at Riverside, and we worked out a deal where that school paid Riverside. We hired another person, which at that time is Andrew Grybos, who's still with us. He's our chief technology officer now. You'll notice a theme: people come to work with us and they stay forever, which is exactly what I want. They grow. So Andrew started as a part-time intern working at that school for us, and is now literally the chief technology officer for the Edutech Group. And so from there, I won't get into every school, but we added another one here or there is these same small schools. And I define small schools as less than 5,000 students, started to identify this issue. And we grew in Riverside there.
So I want to get back to, like you mentioned, Ashley and Andrew, who are really amazing people in your organization who have kind of grown. But I want to stay on some of the origin story, if I can, for a minute.
Sure.
Because at this point, now you are, so already this is kind of a strange but exciting story, right? You're a tech department that's run well, and everybody knows, everyone who's a tech director knows some of the tech directors around them and knows the tech departments around them. And the reality is some are run better than others, right? And you try to learn from one another and share with one another, and there's generally some good growth that occurs that way. But yours is the only story where I know where it's really become one entity that has sort of grown and taken on multiple districts. And then you kind of doubled down on that, and somehow you transition from managing one district to managing multiple districts to eventually starting a company that manages multiple districts. what did that look like, and how did you break away, and how did you make that decision? How did you even come to that conclusion? That's just sort of outside of most of the sort of thinking paths that I know of other tech directors.
So, yeah, clearly a straight path there, right? Um,
Well, that would be
as
the
I
one
was
common thread amongst all of our guests so far, is that they all had some weird meandering, but always interesting story. So,
so
how'd you get there?
as I was saying, I'm older than you, right? I know, I got it. I can learn. So at some point there, Riverside actually, so we kind of had this test of whether we wanted to do it. Riverside had decided they didn't want to do it anymore, and a neighboring school was just wanting to sign up with us, Madison Schools, and we worked out a deal to where myself, at the time it was myself, the assistant track director, and Andrew and Ashley, and we moved to Madison Schools. At the same time, there was another school, Fairport, that we still work with as well, that wanted to work with us. And all of the schools that we were working with at the time, which I think was only 3 or 4, um, they moved with us. So that was kind of a vote of confidence that what we're doing is right. That
Yeah,
both from our team perspective, we were treating our team. They saw the vision of they get the opportunities to grow, to learn new skills, to feel fulfilled in their career, but also, to make more money. I go to work to make money. You do.
sure.
All of our guests do. Uh, so we continued that process in Madison, and it worked well. We never really tried to sell it. We just word of mouth. And I think we grew to maybe 5 or 6 schools when we were working with Madison. And we got to a point where we were limited. In the state of Ohio, we could not work with private schools. We couldn't work. You had to be, if I recall the correct nomenclature or the name or whatever, was they had to be a political entity that had taxing ability for us to work with. So that limited our ability to
Ah,
work with some schools who had contacted us.
I see.
And we also got to the point where we had, 5 full-time people in technology, which was more than a school like Madison actually needed. But we were using those people throughout all the schools. But to an outsider who didn't understand the model, because a school profiting or generating revenue from other schools is odd, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
odd. So in 2021, really in 2020 or maybe 19, throughout, I'd had companies who had approached me about working for them, and I was quite happy. I'm not a risk taker. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just a guy who was doing his job and liked the people I worked with. But it, I actually asked Mark Netka, the CEO at STS, his opinion of whether I should move out of public education and make this a business.
Struggling to find and retain excellent staff for your CIO, academic tech coaching, or database manager positions? Educational Collaborators provides hybrid and remote services from a team of former and current EdTech experts to help you fill these positions with full and fractional roles. Add national EdTech leaders to your staff on your current personnel budget. Need operational IT support? Reach out to my good friend and co-host Bob Cerruti at Edutech. Don't struggle with school technology staffing. Contact us today. Visit educollaborators.com/augmented-services. All right, so hang on, just so our listeners are aware, Mark Netka is the CEO kind of our parent company and the founder of STS Education, who also sponsors this podcast. So also just real quick, Bob, who's STS Education and how did you know Mark?
So STS Education was a vendor. We had bought, I think, starting Second Life computers from them. They had a lifetime warranty on their Second Life computers. That was the selling point to us. We could get
Yeah.
parts for computers, because you'll be shocked by this, Alex, but sometimes we keep computers in education way longer than they should be. So a lifetime warranty was outstanding. It was a differentiator for us. So I had worked with Mark he was my sales rep at STS for 8 or 9 years leading up to that. We had bought a lot of Second Life computers. And they'd always done what they said they would do, and the warranty stayed good for 8-10 years. I was just shocked. So Mark had grown his company, and so I asked his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, what do you think? Should I go into business? Should I take up one of these companies' offer to go work with them? And he said, Bob, I think you should go into business. You'll be able to provide more opportunities for your employees, and you'll be able to work with more schools. Everybody will win, but I think you should do it with me. So it took quite
Very savvy, boss.
yeah, it took quite some convincing, because I was like, but I have a salary and a pension, and it's all good for
Right.
me. So really the deciding factor, or there was two, was I was comfortable working with Mark. He and I, of course, spent a great deal of time, I won't go into, just learning each other and how the business would be run. And Mark, to his credit, is a partner in this, but I run Edutech every day. Like, he never calls me and says, you need to do this. Even when I ask him, what should I do? He doesn't say you need to do this. And so that, and I really, we still had more new, Ashley and Andrew were early on in their careers. Norman Watts, who's our coordinator of
Mhm.
cybersecurity services now, was working there. He started as a part-time technician, was a site tech, but I knew, I talked to them all the time about what they want out of their careers, what they see for themselves. And this was the best way to give them those opportunities. So we started the company almost 3 years ago, July of 2021.
Right.
It was a very nerve-wracking time, but also very gratifying. All of our employees, which were 5 full-time employees, a couple of part-time employees, plus the schools that we had worked with, came along. And so that was kind of like, they had to go through some hoops to sign up with a company, and they did. And it's and every one of those schools is still with us. We have a long history of schools like Madison. And in Madison, the school district I left is still a client of ours. Fairport Harbor, which was one who signed up when we moved to Madison, still works with us. So that's coming up on 8 years since we started that in
That's
April.
amazing. That's
Actually,
awesome.
next month will be 8 years. So that's we're 30 engineers and technicians now at Edutech. And yeah, it's been kind of a ride.
That's an incredible story, to take that leap. And I had the same sort of anxieties, right? When I was, you mentioned like giving up the pension and making those decisions and how difficult that can be. And so I remember, I started Educational Collaborators while I was still a full-time EdTech director. It was a separate company, right? But I was still working full-time. And I continued to work full-time for 8 years. I hired like 4 or 5 other full-time employees to work for the company. And I was still afraid, and they were feeding their families and doing all that kind of stuff. And I was still afraid to make the hop from a full-time tech director's position to an entrepreneur, even though I had full-time employees, which seems strange, but it's a different sort of ball game. But Bob, you've done amazing in this role. Like you said, up to 30 engineers and technicians now across 75 instructional buildings. And across the country. They're not, you started by mentioning Ohio schools and districts, but now you have schools in like Utah and California and Virginia and Idaho, I think, right?
Idaho, Illinois,
Right.
Arizona. Yeah. Yep.
So all over the place, which is really exciting. So, all right, you sort of alluded to this a couple times, and I said I would come back to this because to me, it's one of the most fascinating things. So, most of that growth, how many employees did you have in 2021 when you started?
We had
When you,
five
you had
full-time
five
employees when we
five
started the
full time.
company. Yep.
So in less than 3 years, you've gone from 5 full time to over 30 full time
That's correct.
employees. And so that's a pretty massive move, right? And so so one of the things that I've always been impressed with is, one, you mentioned a lot of those core people, or I imagine most, if not all of those core people, are still with your company.
Yep.
So how do you mentor and grow the people inside your company so that they stay and want to continue to be with you? Because the turnover in IT, particularly in school IT, and now granted, yes, you're a commercial entity now. I understand that. But still, if you sell only to schools, which you only sell to, we're not living on crazy ridiculous margins like B2B, like some B2B
Right.
companies or some B2C companies, right? Business to business or business to consumers. When you're working with schools, 100% of your clients are cash strapped, right? So you're nobody's wallowing, nobody's doing the Scrooge McDuck swim in the big vat of money, right? And in education. So how do you maintain, how do you get them, how do you grow them, and how do you keep them?
So that's a lot. It's really at the center of what we do. We wouldn't be successful if we couldn't identify talent and nurture it and grow it. Because to go hire a network engineer on the open market exceeds many of the contracts that we work with schools. So um, we have partnerships. We have Auburn Career Center here near us was our first partner. They have students who graduate from 3 different computer programs, high school graduates, certifications, and we hire them. I think we have 6 or 7 of their former interns that are full-time employees now in our
Nice.
company.
Okay.
They're climbing the ladder here as well. I think there are some specific tenets to keeping, and I don't pretend to be any kind of business guru at all. And maybe my fear of failure has led me to these things. Is I hope that I can take criticism and recognize what I'm doing wrong and correct it. And I trust feedback. I'm honest with people. I tell them, we have a future for you. We're going to grow this company for you. And I listen when they tell me what they want to do with their careers. When Norman tells me he wants to be able to work in cybersecurity, and I tell him we're not a cybersecurity company. Well, it turns out our schools need some cybersecurity support or a great deal of it, and we have somebody who wants to do it, who had not at the time done it before, but had an interest in it and had proven to be an outstanding employee. Well, that's where we turn to first. We don't go outside. And then when the inevitable mistakes happen, we all make mistakes, but we
Yeah.
stand behind our employees. This is what was wrong. This is what we can do to correct it. We never go into a board meeting or to a superintendent's office or head of school and say, I don't know what Norman was thinking when he did this. We
Right.
say,
Right.
this is what we did wrong. This is what we're doing to fix it. And this is how we're going to move forward. I guess from my standpoint, our team gets all the credit. I take all the blame.
Well,
And
that's the mark of a good leader, though.
K-12 cyber threats are on the rise, and we want to help. Elevate your school's safety with our free cybersecurity checklist. It's your first line of defense, and we're arming you with the top 10 measures to consider when protecting your faculty, staff, and students. Check the show notes for the link to download. It's worked. It has worked to this. I hate that I would not think at all that we are necessarily successful yet. Um, but we're getting there, and whatever success we've had so far, I think leads directly from the people who are part of our team and how they've helped me in growing the company.
I want to dig into something else, though, that I think a lot of technology departments also struggle with, even in their own, is if you're in a district, a lot of times you have the site techs and you don't see your team a lot because particularly if you're a large district over a large geographic area, your people are in different buildings other than maybe a weekly or monthly meeting where you pull everyone together. And so one of the things that I do at Pacific One Source is run a project, a leadership program, right? And one of your staff members, Brett, decided that part of our program is that you have to take on a year-long project. And the project that he wanted to take on was building community in a remote working environment, right? So you guys are covering schools all over the country. So your people are really spread out, not like a district. Your people are really spread out.
Yep.
But it's the same challenge, I think, that a lot of us have, even in our own organizations, even if they're smaller. And so he spent a year trying to work on building culture across a remote community, and it looked pretty successful to me. Tell us a little bit about what Brett did and how it plays out in your organization.
So Brett did an outstanding job. Brett is just a rock star in our organization. We're lucky to have lots of them in our company, but Brett is one. I think the first thing is for us to determine is the culture that we have, because we started as a small company who saw each other every day. Before we were a company or in our infancy, we saw each other every day. The first thing is the culture we have something we want to keep and propagate. Because not every culture, just, people assume culture means good, but it doesn't. I've worked in toxic cultural
Sure.
environments, and
Yeah.
it's not pleasant.
Right.
So first, is that culture what we want to expand across the country? And second, is it, as we got bigger, is it inclusive culture? Inside jokes about things that happen in Northeast Ohio, they don't play in California or in
Right.
Virginia or whatever. So we want that cult to build that culture out. So Brett worked a bit on our culture as well, not just expanding it, but making sure it's what we want to look like to each other. And I
So,
hope that they find that
what kinds of
valuable.
things does he do to build that culture?
So I knew you're going to ask that, but I think it's important first that I wanted to just, a bit about, I think it's important that we have a culture worth propagating.
Yeah.
So we do a number of things. And actually, here next week, we're starting a new thing. We're playing trivia video games together remotely. I think that starts next week. He has put a lot of work into putting this together, picking the game. So everybody, it's not just something that somebody dominates. We're not playing, first person shooter games where, the young guys are going to dominate because they play it all the time. But we have also had group get togethers in geographic areas. We've gone go-karting. We have done Top Golf. We have party in at different offsite like theme parks and that sort of thing, as well as we get together in each of these geographic locations, and I go to them and we have dinner, and there's no business talk. We just learn more about each other and what we want to do and where we've been, that sort of thing.
I think it's awesome. It's great to see that kind of initiative from employees, but it's also great to see your company embrace and enjoy and grow closer together as a result of that. So we're getting close to the end of our episode, and as you know, one of the things that we always end our episodes with is is a question about who's your favorite teacher and why. And you and I have wagered as to whether or not the guest would know how to answer this, but you don't get to count this one because
No,
you
no,
know that the
probably not.
question is coming. So so we
So
can either not count this one or we can count it as a default for me because I kind of need to catch up a little bit.
well, you do need some help with that, because clearly teachers are making impact on those made impacts on us years ago, and they continue to do it now. And I just hope that every student gets that teacher like I have and you've had and talked about. So I'm torn here, so I'll let you pick, Alex. I have
Okay.
Mr. Wampum is one of the teachers I've talked about being
Mhm.
influential. I have a little story about why, or I could tell you about somebody in a business world who was really a mentor to me. You get to pick. Ha ha.
I'm gonna go with the first one because
Okay.
I've enjoyed hearing about Mr. Wampum in the past, and so I'm eager to hear a little bit more. And we've done a fair amount of sort of entrepreneurial discussion already. So
Okay.
and I need to save something for the next time we talk, and so I want to hear that at another time. But let's hear more about Mr. Wampum.
So, of course, required reading in ninth grade English, A Tale of Two Cities.
Ah, yes,
It was
it was
the
the
best of
best of
times.
times. It was the
It
worst
was
of
the
times.
worst of times. Well, let me tell you, the second half of that is me. Oh my God. So in a typical sarcastic way, I went to Mr. Wampum and I said, "Why on earth do I have to read this? This is not going to help me. I want to be an engineer." And he sat there quietly, listened to me, and then he said, "Great, Bob. What would you like to read?" And I went, "Whoa, what do you mean? What do you want to read?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Let me think about that." He said, "I just want you to read and prove that you comprehend reading, that you understand it. But I'd rather you read something you enjoy." And I can't even tell you what I chose to read, but I did. And he gave me that opportunity to do it. He heard me out. He met me halfway. And then it was like, oh no. It was like the dog chasing the car. Oh,
Right,
what do I do now that I'm here? I caught the
right.
car. So I don't remember what I picked to read, but I do remember that I was just so taken aback by a teacher who listened to me. Now, it could have also been, I don't want to indict all of my previous teachers. It could have
Sure.
also been, I felt comfortable enough with him to go to him and say, "Why do I have to read this? Like, I didn't act out in class or anything. I just said, why do I have to read this? This isn't valuable to me. So yeah, so at that point I thought, if I can learn my way, I might be able to learn a little better.
Personalized learning.
Right.
It's very, 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 very slowly catching on.
Right. Right. I think that was, oh God, almost 40 years ago. Is that possible? 35 years
Well,
ago
I
for
think
sure.
so, because as we've established, you're older than I am.
I know.
So,
I know. I was a freshman, so yeah, that was 35 plus years ago. Yes, I'm older. Got it.
well, Bob, this is the highlight of my day. So what a joy. I mean, to be able to just spend time and actually getting paid in our job to talk to one another and
We
share
get paid
stories.
for this?
I just think we're not getting docked for doing this.
Oh, okay. I thought that's where you're going to say, Alex, well, I get paid. You don't get paid, Bob? You
Right.
don't get paid.
Right. Well, Bob, thanks so much for joining us as a guest today. I know this was not something that you wanted to do. You did great. This was wonderful. Thank you.
If you say so, Alex. I am glad it's over, though. I will admit.
Well, next time you get to go back into the host seat. And so until next time, thanks so much, Bob.
Thank you, Alex.